This is the Behind the Micah podcast, where we discuss Jesus, community, and everyday life. I'm your host, Micah Stephen, and our goal is always to take people from where they are to where they need to be. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy the show. Hey guys, welcome to Behind the Micah podcast. So excited to have you guys here today. I got a friend of mine who, listen, we were just talking about this a few minutes ago. I don't think we've seen each other in so long. He says decades, man, which I don't know how I feel about that, because it certainly makes me feel older. And I think of this guy because, man, we go back to our days at Whitewater Camp, but we'll get into that just a moment. Camp, yeah. He comes to us from Felicity, Ohio, from the Felicity Christian Churches where he preaches. Jim Gibson, man, Jim, so good to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Micah. Thanks for asking me to be a part of this. It's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, so we go back. Let's go back for just a minute to I want to think of how long ago it was. You were working at Bright.
I was an associate minister at Bright Christian Church, and I think I started there in 97, I would guess.
Yeah.
So it was through sometime either 96 or 97 all the way through the early 2000s. So okay. I was there. And so, yeah. And I started off working at junior high camp.
Yeah.
And then, after working it for a year or so, they said, hey, what you want to dean it? So I was the dean of junior high camp for several years. So
yeah,
you know how that works, right?
Those were some of the best years, man. Some of the best years I had was going to the church camp, and your week was definitely one of the best weeks out there for sure.
Yeah, it's like, let's find somebody gullible enough to dean the week of junior high.
Well, man,
but no, I enjoyed it too. I mean, it was a good learning and growing experience for me too. So,
Well, I was gonna say you hit it pretty well if that was how you felt, because man, you made it look like you were just a pro, man. It was just a natural.
Oh, well, thank you.
So, what was it like working with Mark Fugate? Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, Mark was one of the cool things about Mark is, I'm a young kid back then, right?
Yeah.
And so you learn a lot of stuff in Bible college, but you don't have anybody to kind of hold your hand and kind of walk you through stuff. And that's who Mark was for me, Yeah. Mark took a lot of time, let me just hang out with him and observe, and took me hospital calling with him, and, doing evangelistic calls and all that kind of stuff with him. And, I'm musical as well. So, a little bit of the wiggle you hear now in my piano playing is Mark,
Yeah.
And so, just a really good, just modeling stuff for me and including me in his ministry. I joke around with people now about, we would sit down during the week and talk about his Sunday school lesson. And I was wondering why he was having me do it. And then just randomly, he would say, I would go into his class. And there was one Sunday where he said, hey, Gibbs is teaching this morning. And I'm like, what? Because that's what he called him.
Yeah.
What? Because we studied it this week, and so he really kind of brought me out of my comfort zone too.
Oh, that's cool.
And kind of took, got me out of my box. And so I'm really appreciative to Mark for investing in me like that. So.
Yeah. You know what? He is, it's so funny. We both grew up in the same area. And then, of course, growing up, listening to him preach and, hearing him speak at, camps and revivals and, you name it, Mark was speaking, even sometimes coming to Brighton, hearing him preach. I mean, even to this day, and then moving away eventually and doing ministry and I moved, 3 hours from the area, and wouldn't you know it, man, 35 minutes down the road, Mark Fugate's preaching at another church over this way.
Yeah.
And it's so cool, man. And I have leaned into, I tell him all the time, I say, Mark, you're a legend. And he said, legend means old. So,
well, who else is, who else is working with him now is one of my best friends on the entire planet.
Yeah.
Jimmy Johnson.
Oh yeah. Jimmy. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Jimmy was one of my roommates early on in college, and we've stayed friends over the years.
What? So, I didn't recognize that you and Jimmy were friends.
Oh yeah.
I've had Jimmy come preach for me.
That was an experience, right?
Well, Mark would always be like, hey, I asked him one time when I first came to Odin, I said, hey man, I got to get somebody in here that can preach when I'm gone.
Yeah.
And Mark's like, hey man, I'll loan you my guy, Jimmy. He's like, but you'll owe me, right? Because he's my Sunday school teacher. So when Jimmy's not there to teach, that
Yeah.
means I have to teach.
Yeah.
So, so he would loan Jimmy, but I didn't know that. That's so cool that you and
Yeah.
Jimmy are tight. I have to ask him next time. Ask him about you.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, both of those guys have a lot of love for him. And so
That's cool.
when, I think, Jimmy I think it was right around the time his dad, was dying. I think he was kind of looking, to change it up a little bit. And I think Mark was looking for help over there, and it was like, yeah, get the two of them together. So
How cool is that?
yeah, yeah.
Are you familiar with? I'm sure you are because he was there for a long time. Are you familiar with Kevin Smith?
Kevin Smith, I know Kevin. Yeah,
Yeah, Kevin. I've
Smitty.
had Kevin on. Yeah, I've had Kevin on here before. He's over at.
He's campus minister, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the
With
church.
White Oak,
White Oak. I was gonna say
yeah,
Oak, and I was like, what is it? Wait, White Oak. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
White Oak.
Small one, man. You know what? Some of those relationships that I built, even from like your week, man, are still. I still have some of those relationships still, just because of things from church camp and growing up. I mean, some of my better friends even to this day are from that week. So it's so cool how things.
Yeah.
But let me not turn things on. I want to focus on you today, man. And I'd like to know. I want you to tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are today. I mean, how did you? Did you always know you wanted to be a preacher, or did you always know you wanted to be in the ministry, and kind of how it led up to where you're at?
Well, I started. I first started going to church because a friend, and I'm talking. I was 12 years old, 12, 13 years old. A friend down the road invited me to go to South Norwood Church of Christ. And it's interesting because his mom didn't go, but she was making him go. So his name was Frankie, and Frankie's like, "Hey Jim, let's go, and we can sit back in the back and heckle."
Yeah.
All right, great. So I just kind of went and really wasn't paying attention, and so I just assumed that he was there. He went. So I went back. I can't remember if it was a Sunday or Wednesday, and he wasn't there, and didn't have a partner in crime. So I was kind of,
Yeah.
and I started listening, and met some people there, and a guy, he was volunteering as the youth director there. His name was Mark Neal. He was the kind of big guy with the Southwestern Ohio Round Robin division of the Bible Bowl for years and years and years.
Okay.
Anyway, so he started a Bible Bowl team there and did youth group, and I got into those kind of things. And I guess I'd been going to church for about 6 months, and I decided that I believed this stuff, and I wanted to be a Jesus follower. And
Yeah.
I came from a non-Christian family too, so I mean, I didn't have any of that, coming from home.
Sure.
And so it was really that group, and Mark and his wife Lisa, and Jason Jones. I don't know if you know Jason, and Sarah Jones, who was Sarah Frisney, who's Tom Frisney's daughter.
Okay.
Anyway, they were kind of, and a few other people were kind of my group that I had when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And then when I started looking toward college, originally I was planning on going to the Conservatory of Music at UC.
Yeah.
But we did really well in Bible Bowl, so I had some of these scholarships that I had to Cincinnati, and I looked at it and I thought, well, I can go my freshman year and get some of these prerequisites out of the way, and then transfer over my sophomore year into the music program over there. So I tried out for the music program, made it. And, beginning of my sophomore year is when I really felt convicted that, at that point, even the music stuff at that point was all about me. It was all about me showing off and me doing, whatever.
Sure.
And so I had to make a choice. And so once I made that shift and that choice that, it can't be this way. I really do have to dedicate my life to the Lord and be all about him. That ministry was just the logical thing for me. So, and so I'm like, then I want to do it 100% all the way, And so that's when I changed my major to Christian ministry. I have a biblical studies. I have a double major, biblical studies, Christian ministry. And then from then on, just focused on, I wasn't raised a Christian kid, and now I'm there with all these. Now I'm in the ministry program with all these preachers' kids, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I got to play catch up, and so that's when I really became really a student of Scripture.
Awesome.
Having that Bible Bowl background too helped, because memory and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But that's and so that's kind of, I've just been following that for the last few decades and several
Yeah.
decades.
How awesome is that, man?
Yeah.
Just kind of a cool story. I think it's so awesome to hear different people's stories and how they get to where they're at, and kind of how we all ended up where we're at. But how many years total ministry would you say?
Ordained. Actually, I was ordained in 90. When was I ordained? I'm looking over my shoulder at my.
You're good.
Oh yeah. Oh, I was ordained 92, so I was still in school.
Yeah.
I was married in 93, and I graduated in 94.
Wow.
So I was working. The first church I was at was down in Bracken County, Kentucky, but that was part time while I was still in school. And then when I graduated, I came actually here to this church. I came to Felicity.
Yeah.
And then when I decided that youth ministry wasn't my gig,
sure,
that's when I moved out to Bright as an associate minister. Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys,
but since then, like I said, I was the only Christian in my family, and now my mom's a Christian.
awesome.
My grandma, on my mom's side, I was able to baptize her about a year and a half before she passed.
Oh my gosh.
I witnessed to her forever.
Yeah.
And then about 3 years ago, my father finally became a Christian.
Oh man, how cool is that?
And so, yeah, he's over in northern Kentucky, and I was up in Meadville at the time, and said, "Jimmy, you got to come down and baptize me." I'm like, "What?" Because Dad's always lived a very rough life, and he's made a change, man.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
that's awesome. That's great news.
Wearing them down a little at a time.
Can I ask you about, like, how was that? Like, how was it? I know you said you grew up maybe in a non-Christian home is the way you would say it. How was it, like, after you came to Christ? How was it growing up, even though you were really involved in it? Did it make things hard on you as a Christian?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Especially, my mom and dad divorced when I was about 4. And so both of them remarried.
Yeah.
And my mom and her husband, it was interesting. They really kind of weren't for. First of all, when I started going to church, it was kind of like a weird thing.
Yeah.
She wanted to be there when I was baptized, but she wasn't, because it was just something that I made the decision. I didn't know that there was that, back then, that desire. But then, yeah, when I went to Bible college, it was just like, yeah, well, we're not going to help you do that,
Yeah.
And so I worked at pizza places and bus tables and all kind of stuff through school to pay for it. And I wound up graduating only owing a couple thousand, like $5,000, I think.
Wow.
Because you're kind of trying to pay as you're still in and that kind of stuff. But
yeah,
it was hard. I mean, it was hard, but it, you own it.
Was there ever a moment where you thought about, you're like, man, I'm glad I did what I did, but I don't know about this ministry thing, because it's just tough. It's tough to, my parents aren't behind it. Family's not getting in on this. Did it ever make you think, like, man, maybe I should consider, I know you talked about music and stuff like that. Did you ever get to a point where you were like, maybe I'm making the wrong choice when it comes to ministry?
Oddly enough, I don't think I have. I mean, it was one of those things that once I made the decision, that's just been the course.
It was in cement. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I in college, I met my wife, Wendy.
Yeah.
And she's one that was born and raised in the church, and her dad was an elder at Forestdale.
Okay.
And so they were Christian people, and so I think that influenced too. I think a lot of her dad. I think a lot of Mel, her dad, and I guess I was blessed that even though I didn't have like this family support, or I didn't have my dad kind of holding my hand and showing me the way, there were people, and you mentioned Mark, you
Mm,
know,
yeah.
um, a guy that used to be the elder there at Bright, Lloyd Smith.
Yeah.
Lloyd, I mean, even after I left there, I'd get a call from Lloyd like twice a year, you
Yeah.
know, and he would always be, well, Jim, how are we doing? And so what I really got from him was like, no, he was my partner in this. And so I always considered Lloyd um, as my elder, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And so he was always checking up on me. And so there were even guys at South Norwood where I was baptized and became a Christian that have invested in me over the years, and Mark Neal was one of them. And
Yeah.
just people that I kind of look to, and I always kind of ask the question, how would they handle this or that?
For sure. For sure. Man, it's awesome.
So, and that's why now I think, I know one of the hot phrases now, or concepts right now in churches, is discipleship.
Yeah.
But that's really what that is. I mean, that's why it's important to be in these kind of relationships with other people that can help and support and encourage, um, and hold you accountable.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of these kind of things.
For sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about that. Are you still? I mean, I don't know if some of them are still around or not, but do you still stay in contact with any of those guys? I mean, that you mentioned
Um,
is kind of invested in you, the ones that are still here.
Lloyd's Lloyd's gone on to be with the Lord.
Yeah.
Mark Neal, I haven't talked to him since I've been down here, but Mark's probably less than an hour away from here. He's living out close to here now. And
Yeah.
Jimmy, I haven't talked to Jimmy in a while, but we talk a few times a year.
Yeah.
Um, the last time I talked to Mark was actually when Jimmy was planning on going over there, so I
Yeah.
had to had
I
to kind of
gotcha.
make connection there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, man. I can't tell you how important it is to have those people. I'm with you on that, man. Those people who you can look to, and that invest in you and all those different things, man. Those people are crucial. You said you've been in ministry now at least 25 plus years, right? And that's awesome, by the way. That's incredible. Just to have that. I allude to that to everybody I get on here that's been in ministry for a long time. And I always say, you definitely got to have some thick skin to be in ministry for that long, just for the stuff you deal with and the people you come across. and
yeah,
and recently on the podcast, we've been talking about different kind of people who are just really hard to love, hard to maybe exist with, because they just make things really hard. um Today we're going to talk about a type of people that I wonder if you've ever dealt with. Have you ever dealt with someone who you would say is controlling or manipulating, maybe in ministry or not in ministry?
oh, definitely, all the time.
Yeah. I,
Yeah,
I,
I mean,
yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
there's a few of them in every group, if not more, in every group. And go ahead.
Why? No. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think we have? And you said there's always a few. Well, why do you think there's so many? There's so much of that in our world today. People who are trying to control other people or manipulate them, and sometimes they're doing it unintentionally. They don't even
Yeah.
know that they're doing that. Why do you think that is?
Well, and this kind of goes back to when I was talking about discipleship before. You know, I think we do. Um, we don't do such a good job, I think, in the church, helping people to grow up spiritually.
Mm,
And so we think that if we teach them the right stuff, they'll get it,
yeah.
and that's not
Instead
how it
of instead
works.
of walking with them through
Instead
it.
of walking with them. So especially in churches, we've got a lot of people who are still, they might have been in the church for 50 years, but they're still spiritual children,
Yeah.
which means they've not shifted the focus, from themselves to serving and loving other people. And so we leave them there, and we
Yeah.
don't help them to get past there. And even in churches, we make excuses for people. Oh, that's just how so and so is,
Mm,
where he's rude to everybody and he's offending everybody.
Yeah.
And he's saying stupid stuff, and we go, oh, that's just so and so. We got to love him.
Yeah.
Luckily, if we loved him, we'd help him to get past that.
For sure. They're still drinking the milk instead of eating the meat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
There's some stories in the Bible of a few people who I can think of just off the top of my head. One of them certainly would be, Jacob and Esau. You remember the story of Jacob and Esau, and how Jacob, he kind of manipulated his way into the blessing, the birthright from his dad. You remember this. Esau comes in hungry one day, and Jacob's like, "Cool, man, I can hook you up, bro." And because of it, Esau gives in, because in his own way, Jacob did some manipulating there, I would say. You think of the story of Herod with John the Baptist. Remember, he was having that birthday party. It was really awesome. You got to think there's probably some drinking going on. And, he looks at the daughter of Herodias and says, hey, you can have whatever you want, right? In that moment, whatever you want. And she never forgets it. She goes back to mama. Mama says, hey, I want John the Baptist's head on a platter because, he kind of called me out for my sin, and I don't like that. So let's kill him. And so she goes back, and Herod does something he doesn't necessarily want to do, but he does it because he made it, and they manipulated him into that decision. And maybe the biggest one is the story of Samson and Delilah. Mm-hmm. Right, where Samson has his strength, and she kind of seduces him into a, come on, tell me what it is. It brings your strength, and the story. In fact, the Bible says, I think it's even in the King James, it says it this way, which says that she nagged him to death. Mm-hmm. That's pretty crazy. You ever been nagged before? I'm not asking you to tell me wife stories.
I don't know what you're talking about. Well, one of the things I think as preachers, as church leaders, I think something we need to make sure of is, first of all, that we're not being the ones that are being manipulative.
Yes.
Yes. And secondly, that we need to make sure that we're not also on the other end of it, that we're not codependent. Like codependent people are always looking for the approval of others.
That's good.
And so I, some things that I can think of, in my experience with people that I would consider controlling or manipulative, is, eventually it comes down to, you can see they want their way so bad that you start catching them in lies. They start telling lies about what goes on.
Yeah.
They turn it around and act like they're the victim in certain circumstances in order to get what they want.
Yeah.
And so there's all this like immaturity that we would say in any other experience. We go, well, that's being a baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they use those things just to simply because they want something, and they'll do whatever they can to get it.
Yeah.
And so I think once we start recognizing those things, we need to have, this is a book that I read years ago. My wife and I read it. She was dealing with some things, and it was talking about setting boundaries.
Yeah.
And so I think once we recognize that there are those personalities there, we do need to set some boundaries with them, and say, you can't go past this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then, they want to hold you accountable to things they think that they want, and also they want you to comply to their demands. Well, at some point there's got to be that mutual accountability, and so that's why I say, I think if we could just get our churches back to that more of a relational model, I think we would do a better job in our church families with helping people to move past those particular behaviors. But we've supported that, and we, in some churches that kind of stuff is, people get away with it, and it's passed on. Yeah,
almost
like I said, in those situations where that's the way so and so is, we just have to, deal with it.
You know,
No.
we kind of feed it a little bit almost more
Yeah.
than get rid of it. You know,
Yeah.
I think you were talking about earlier is kind of looking for ways. And I think a lot of times the reason why it's so big with people who are manipulative or controlling or whatever is that it's hard to see it. Sometimes it's hard to see it, and so sometimes they'll use things like praise. They'll flatter, hey boss, great presentation, or you did a
Feed
good
your
job.
ego. Yeah.
Yeah, you're looking good, losing weight, whatever it is. Or sometimes they'll use it in ways like with threats. They'll threaten, if you do this, you're going to regret it, or whatever the case may be, and they'll use threats to manipulate. Or probably one of the biggest ones I would say is guilt. They guilt people.
Mhm.
After all I've done for you, whatever. Or
Why won't you do what I want?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
or how can you call yourself a Christian? ... Right. In those situations. And I think the biggest thing for us is to be able to see it first before we can eliminate it or squash it. We have to be able to see when someone is trying to do that to us. And I think there's a great story I'd like to spend probably the rest of our time in Matthew 16. And I know you're familiar with this. Matthew 16, there's a story where Jesus and Peter are discussing with each other. And it says in verse 21, it says, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Verse 22, here's where it says, Peter took him aside. That's probably big for us to remember, and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. I think a lot of times people who are manipulative people, controlling people, they try to do what Peter just did to Jesus. They lose power when there's groups around, so they pull people to the side, kind of get you to isolate it a little bit, so that they can control that way. I don't think that Peter's trying necessarily to cause harm here. I think Peter just wanted his plan for Jesus's life rather than God's plan.
Mm-hmm. And I think right there too is, the reason why he calls him Satan is, I was doing a study not too long ago through the temptation in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus, the man, this is something that he's struggling with this the whole time,
Yeah.
He doesn't want to go to the cross. The man Jesus does not want to do this,
Right.
But he's like, okay, but I'm submitting myself to the Father and what he wants. And that's what we see in the garden.
Yeah.
Hey, Father, if there's any other way we can get out of this, if there's a plan B, let's do that.
Let's do it. Yeah.
But okay, I'm going to submit to you. And so I think that's why he calls him Satan there is, it's something that he's already struggling with.
Yeah.
And
I love this because it kind of points us to, how do you know that you're being controlled? How do you know that you're being manipulated? Well, maybe for you, it's you have a hard time saying no. I know in my past, there's been a lot of times I've had a hard time saying no. And it wasn't until I think I was reading a book. Called Weird by Craig Rochelle. You maybe have read it, where Craig says, and he says, sometimes you have to say no to the good things in order to say yes to the best things. And I learned really quickly, like, there was a lot of times I was saying yes. And it wasn't necessarily that I was saying yes because I wanted to. It was because I was saying yes because I didn't want to make anybody upset, or I didn't want to hurt anybody, or I wanted to, as you alluded to earlier, please people.
Yeah. This is why I started off by saying, especially in our roles, how do we know if we're being leaders or if we're manipulating people to do what we want them to do?
Yeah.
Like, where's the line for us? And I think the line is, a controller or a manipulate. Like, this is the vision for the church, right?
Yeah.
And then people, I don't want to do that. Well, sometimes it's a very tempting to move into that.
Yeah.
And to do what you think is the long term.
Yeah.
So we got to be very, very careful about that. That what we're doing is more, inspiring people and calling them to higher things instead of manipulating and in order to get people to do what we want them to do. And the difference, I think, is, what is it? Is it really what you think God wants for the church?
Yeah.
Is it really, the plan that's laid out for us and the Word of God for what we're supposed to be accomplishing? Or is it just what Jim wants?
Right.
Or is it just what Micah wants?
Right.
And so we have to be very careful about how we handle the group that the Lord has trusted us with, and that we really are keyed in on, his vision for the church and trying to accomplish what he wants instead of what I want or what you want, or, we can get ourselves in trouble with that,
Oh, for sure.
And so first of all, we got to make sure that we're not being those people. And secondly, our role is not to make people happy.
Yeah.
Our role is to share the gospel with people, to get them into saving relationship with God through Jesus, to help them to grow and mature so that they can become disciple makers, so they can do this too.
For sure.
So we're supposed to be reproducing ourselves, not reproducing Jesus through our example.
Absolutely.
Not just making everybody happy, because sometimes in order to help them to mature, you gotta make them unhappy.
Well, you know this as well as I do. You're in the wrong business if you're in it to please people, because you never will accomplish that, right? I mean, you there's no way to keep everybody happy all the time.
If you're codependent and you have some controlling people in your church, right? There's multiple wills that you have to try to please.
Oh, for sure.
That's going to tear you apart, man.
Yeah, yeah. I love the way that Paul put it. He kind of said it this way in Galatians 1. He said, obviously, I'm not trying to please people. I'm trying to please God. If I was still trying to please people, I wouldn't be Christ's servant.
Exactly.
Right. So I think we have to remember that, like, why are we doing this and who are we doing it for? And sometimes learning to say no. But you talked about boundaries, setting boundaries, and how important it is to set those boundaries. And Jesus does that, as you talked about in verse 23, where Jesus, he turns to Peter in Matthew 16. He says, get behind me, Satan. Right. You're a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, I think sometimes we have to be the ones who, in those situations, we have to be the one to, so to speak, to put our foot down, right? Where we have to say, I love you and I want you to know that I love you, but it's not going to fly. Like I'm not in on this, right? You're not, or for some people it's like parents, right? Parenting. Kid doesn't get what he wants, and so he throws a fit. And a lot of times parents just give in, and you got to be the one to say, look, I love you and I care about you, but you're not going to get what you want every single time you want it. And that's just not how, and I think sometimes we have to do that. We might be the one that has to, to hang up the phone or whatever it is that we have to do in order to set those boundaries that you were talking about.
Have you done that in your ministry? I mean, have you had to, be the heavy to tell, the guy that's being a jerk to everybody that he needs to chill out, or the person that's gossiping that they need to,
It's not very fun. I don't like having those conversations, and I've probably been on both ends of it. I've probably been the one that's been controlling at some point in my ministry, probably earlier in my ministry, especially. And then I've also been the guy who has had to have that conversation. In fact, I've dealt with people who, like, I had someone one time who liked to gossip a lot. And so that person came to me and said, hey, blah, 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 this person says this. And I just, I think I've gotten to a point where I don't if you got a problem with somebody, man, just go say it, to go talk to them about it, And so I took that person directly to the person who they were talking about. And I said, hey, I think this person has something they want to say. Well, they didn't like me very much when I did that. But, I just had to learn how to set that boundary up where I'm going, hey, the best thing for you to do in that situation is to go to the person and, because I'm not gonna be involved in it. I don't want to be in that. And I think
one of the things
I think we'd be better off that way if we did it more often.
Yeah. One of the things I think is interesting is when you do, somebody comes and says, well, there are a lot of people that are upset about this thing.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, who are they?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to. Well, yeah. Okay. So that's an unfair, that's an unfair scenario you just put me in, situation you just put me in,
Yeah.
Even, you're supposed to be able to face your accusers, right? But I'm not going to tell you who.
Yeah.
And then once you find out who it is, it's that guy and his wife,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe one friend of theirs, and it's like, all right, that's what we're talking about then. But no, there's a lot of people that are upset over
Yeah.
this, and that's a way to try to manipulate,
Yeah, maybe you've heard this one before. I had a guy one time who used threats, and so he would say things like, he used to say, he'd say, "Do you know how much money I give to this church?" And I was like, I does it matter? Like, if God wants it to happen, it's going to happen regardless of whether you give a dime or not. If you think God needs your money, then you know what I mean.
My
But
viewpoint,
like, maybe you've had
my viewpoint's always, when Simon the sorcerer tried to buy the ability to give spiritual gifts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
May your money go to hell with you.
Yeah. You said that to him?
No, but that's the verse that always hits my head when people want to try to use money as a guilt trip, or
do what I say or I'm pulling my money.
Exactly.
Okay, man, we're gonna stop everything we're doing because you give a lot of money. All right.
So yeah,
that's awesome. I'm gonna use that one.
No, don't.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
I'm being transparent with you that goes through my head every time.
I'm kidding, bro. I'm kidding. That's awesome. But I think that's so important, right? It's so important to set those boundaries. It's so important, first of all, to be able to see it and see what it is and how it is. And like I said, that comes in all different kinds of ways. And if you're that person who has a hard time saying no, you might be that person. But you also need to learn to set those boundaries and be able to cut it off and be able to say no, be able to snip it where it is. It doesn't mean that you don't love that person. It doesn't mean that you don't care about that person. It just means we're not going to be controlled that way. But as you said at the very beginning of all this, maybe the truth of the matter is it all comes down to God help me to see my own controlling when it's in myself.
Yeah.
And
where are we when it comes to, what are we doing and why are you doing it? A lot of times we got to revisit that.
Yeah.
Michael, why are you choosing to do this?
Yeah.
And it has to come down to, that we have totally bought into Jesus' mission and coming to, because we're supposed to be continuing that.
Yeah.
And he came to seek and save that which is lost. And as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. If we really believe that we're left here on that mission, and we really believe, I was reading, I can't remember. It was a guy from some high church somewhere, like Episcopal or whatever, years ago, who made a statement that the Lord's church must be both missional and eschatological. And I'm like, huh? Well, looking into what he was saying is we've got to be missional. In other words, we got to be about continuing the mission of Jesus, of reconciling people back to the Father.
Yeah.
And we must be eschatological. And what he meant by that is time is short.
Yeah.
And the sky is going to open up, and we are going to have to give an account to God for what we've done with the time.
Yes.
And so if we're claiming to be the Lord's church, we got to be those two things. And everything else is just,
for sure.
And so, but I think for us in leadership positions, we got to be keyed in on those two things. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? If it's an ego thing, if it's you like being in front of people, if it's anything else other than you've bought onto the mission of Jesus and you have to be a part of accomplishing it in your lifetime, then that's not a good enough reason to be in ministry.
Oh, for sure. So,
I
think sometimes we even think of it as maybe controlling when it comes to controlling other people. But when we look at ourselves, sometimes it's that we trust our plans more than we do God's. And that could be a way if we kind of manipulate our plans. God says, I got a plan for your life. And you can look throughout the Old Testament. I mean, look at the Old Testament and how things might've been different in some of the stories had people done it the way that God said to do it. like, like had Abraham waited on God, him and Sarah waited on God, right? Instead, they were like, God, you're not working in our time, so we're going to take control of the situation. And he sleeps with Hagar and has Ishmael. And I mean, we're still seeing the effects of that even in 2021, right? Because the descendants of Ishmael are still here today, and they're still waging war against Christians today, all because we did it outside. We thought that we knew our plans better than God. You look at the story of I mean, that whole family, man, just has tons of stories of how they tried to take control of the situation. And I think I'm guilty of that. I try to schedule my own plans instead of going through kind of, maybe this sounds wrong, but go through a God filter. And, I'm a control freak sometimes.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes we're also way too pragmatic, like we'll say, yeah, I believe the stuff. Like, okay, let's take Abraham for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, he believed what God said, right?
Yeah.
They just got to a point where they didn't trust God enough to do it God's way.
Right.
They wanted to do it their own way, or what made sense to them. And I think we're the same way currently, in the church. Is, we'll all say we believe the gospel. I read one guy say that we believe Jesus' message. We want Jesus' results, but we refuse to use Jesus' methods.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And if we would just believe Jesus' message, use his methods, that's the only way to truly get Jesus' results. And he was talking about this whole discipleship thing, and the way that Jesus invested himself in people. And so
that's good.
I think that's where we are,
I think isn't that that's biblical, right? I mean, trust in
Oh,
with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding.
yeah.
But in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight.
But with most people, that's not what they do.
Oh, for sure. Oh, absolutely. And
I believe in the goal, but I'm going to force it there. I'm going to get there however I can. Right.
Yeah, because my timing or my thoughts are essentially what they come down to. We could, if we broke them all the way down to its simplest form, essentially what we're saying, even though we're not really saying this, is that we're saying my ways are better than God's. I know what's best more than God does. And we wouldn't come out and say that, but by our actions, that's exactly what we're saying.
Yeah. And we want to talk about controlling and manipulating as if it's a bad thing by a person who has bad motives. But sometimes it's people who have good motives who are refusing to submit themselves to the way that God wants things done.
Yeah.
So that they mean well.
Yeah.
But
too often we say we make good things God things, and that's not always the case.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of what you're saying is, we it's not always a bad thing. And look, the story with Abraham, there were some things that worked out, even though that wasn't necessarily the way that God wanted it to be. And God eventually made it happen, through Abraham.
Yeah.
But it was that, they tried to take it in and honestly, like, to be fair to them, like, can you imagine like being Abraham and Sarah, who, and Sarah overhears, hey, you're going to have a baby and you're in your 90s. Like, she's going, I mean, she laughed, right? Because she's like, that's jacked up.
Well, that's something that, God's going to accomplish what he was going to accomplish.
Yeah.
I think they just muddled the whole thing up, though.
Yeah.
God still got it done.
Sure.
Yeah. But there's a lot of pain in the world because of, we decide to go our own way with stuff. And that's something. And once again, to get back to the whole leadership concept, that's something we need to make sure that we're not doing, that we're not causing undue pain in our good intention to do things, but our refusal to listen to what God wants and how he wants it done,
Yeah.
So
I think maybe the end of the day, and the way we could probably, even wrap this whole talk up, is that giving, because I know this sounds really cliche, but it was kind of like the great theologian Carrie Underwood who said, Jesus, take the wheel, right?
Take the wheel. Yeah.
And I think honestly,
are we going to break into song now? Is that
I feel like we should. It's going on in my head right now. But you know what? Like I do think, to an extent, if we would truly just say, hey, Jesus, I'm yours in all aspects of my life, in my plans, in my finances, in my family, in my decisions, whatever the case may be, in my marriage, God, if I would just surrender that to you, and because as we said, we're our own, a lot of times we're the biggest control freak in our life, but also understanding it in other people and knowing what to look for, and then being able to, as you said, set those boundaries. And when you set those boundaries, even into yourself, you might have to set those boundaries where you have to cut certain things off and say no to yourself sometimes. Because God, as I'll wrap it up with Isaiah 26:3-4, it says, you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. And then verse 4 says, trust in the Lord always, for the Lord God is the eternal rock. And I thought that was that was kind of a great verse to end it on, because that's the key. I know it sounds much easier than it is. Trust in God, but do we really do that with our lives?
And one of the verses that it's repeated over and over and over and over again in Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, all over the place.
Yeah,
it's something I think we need to remember. And once again, to bring it back to the whole leadership thing, is God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
That's good.
Yeah. It's all over Scripture.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's almost like pride's a problem or something.
Exactly.
So, man, I'm so glad that you jumped on here today.
Let
me ask you this. I gotta get this before I let you go. If there's one person on here that's listening, who maybe is dealing with a situation that we've been talking about with a controlling person, or maybe it's just themselves, what's one piece of advice you would give them if they're going through that right now?
If you're dealing with a controlling person, I would say, first of all, check yourself, make sure you're not being that way yourself. Also, make sure that you're not being codependent. I mean, we got to live at peace with people. We've got to do all that. But if they're trying to force you to do something that you're not wanting to do, that you're not comfortable with, and you don't think is right, then you need to set a boundary there, and you got to say no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great. Hey, sometimes we get threatened because somebody else has a great idea or whatever. We need to make sure that's not what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you need to stay humble. But if it's just somebody trying to impose their own will upon you and you're not wanting to go, you got to set a boundary.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
dude, thanks so much for jumping on.
Yeah, Micah. Yeah, anytime, man.
I appreciate it. I got so much respect for you, man. Growing up, and like I said, and you got to invest in me a little bit as just a camper at a camp. Never thought, man, it would have a lasting impression, but you have, and I appreciate you. Praying for you, praying for your ministry, praying for your family, and man, keep doing some awesome things. Felicity, how far are you from Cincinnati?
Oh, not that far. Maybe I'm 20 some minutes away from 275, which is the loop away from it. So okay. I'm on the other side of New Richmond. I don't know if you know where New Richmond is.
Yes.
South of Bethel.
Okay. So yeah. Do you get your Skyline fixed now?
Oh man, yeah.
Didn't get that. Did you get? You didn't get that in Pennsylvania.
Oh, they didn't have it. No.
Oh, it's a shame. That's Nineveh up there. No, I'm kidding. I say the same thing over here because I'm like, there's no Skyline, and everybody over here they don't understand it. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, Micah, thank you so much for asking me to be on here, and I'm praying for you as well, brother. Like I told you before, and sending messages to you. Really proud of you.
Thanks, bro. I really
appreciate it. Do a good work over there, brother.
All right, man. Thanks so much. Appreciate you. Have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you later.
All right, God bless.
All right, see you. This has been a Behind the Micah podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check us out next week. And remember, we're always striving to love God, love others, and serve both.